Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having surrounding the business and culture of funeral service and end-of-life care. This week, I am speaking with Mel Bennett. She is the founder and current operator of Life Forest, which is, technically speaking, a conservation cemetery, but it is so much more than that. Not only that, but her story, how she got there, and what she's doing now was worth the extra 10 minutes. So this show is going to be closer to 40 minutes than to 30 minutes, but I assure you that it's worth it. As you may have noticed last week, I've added a post-credit sequence where I talk about some behind-the-scenes stuff associated with the story in the podcast. So if that's not worth staying on for, I don't know what is. Remember that we so much welcome your feedback, and if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, we will tell you how to do that at the end of the credits. But right now, we're going to get into this fascinating conversation with Mel Bennett following this message from our friends and sponsors at Homesteaders Life Company.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company, owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
So you first came to my attention earlier this year when people started, quote, opening, unquote, Life Forest. And I want to talk to you about that whole project toward closer to the end of the show, because I think that's fascinating. But I also got a hard time from my colleague because I hadn't recalled that you were one of the runner-ups in the Cemetery Excellence Award in 2024. So before we get started, I want to talk to you about how you got into the business for people who aren't familiar at all with Life Forest. Can you just give me like a startup story?
Well, I think the appropriate thing to say is that I stumbled into the business because it was not the end goal, which sounds a little bit strange, but it started with a personal passion project in order to bury my mother in a particular way and not being able to find somebody to service that need, but also the respect that my family generally in all the generations that has had for cemeteries due to the fact that they have kept burial records that become an important part of genealogy and research. So I understand the importance of cemeteries in legacy keeping and protection, and I wanted that, but I wanted just a little variation to the approach. And that's kind of how it all began.
So one of the things I love about your story is I write a lot of stories about startups. It's kind of like my main thing. And so many of my startups are tech startups. It's like, I wanted to do this when my mother passed away and I couldn't do it. I wanted to do that. But very few people say I wanted to have a cemetery of record when my mother died so that she could be in it. Can you talk about the importance of that, the importance of having a record and the importance of being able to find a place where you could do precisely the kind of burial you want, the kind of hoops you had to jump through to kind of make that happen?
So I think the importance and my knowledge of the importance of cemetery record was when I was 27, I went on a personal journey to be able to visit the grave of my great, great, great grandfather. And that took me to Sweden. And my grandmother at the time had recently passed away. And I had found some letters from someone in Sweden, a connection that she had made, because that's how they did it back, in the 70s and 80s, from a woman who had maintained writing back and forth to my grandmother. When my grandmother passed away, she had sent a letter to the house saying, "Dear Inez, I have not heard back from you. This is Anita. I'm afraid that something may have happened to you. Please, somebody get in touch with me."
Mm.
So I contacted Anita and kind of, told her the sad news of my grandmother's passing. And that ended up opening a conversation around a visit. And so I remember at 27, I flew out to Sweden and then took the train to where Anita lived. And she picked me up from the train, and she was a distant relative. And when she picked me up, I honestly saw my grandmother's face in her face. She looked so familiar. And
Wow.
we had this kind of instant connection. We had never met in person. We had never exchanged letters, but we were part of the same family and we loved the same person. So she spent the time with me to talk about all these letters that went back and forth between her and my grandmother, and how my grandmother located her through the church burial records of
Wow.
my great-great grandfather. And so that's how the connection was made, through this burial record. And I also remember she took me to that place, and I sat on that knoll, on that hill in this older cemetery that had, the small, beautiful white church. And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, I can feel this generational connection. I must have been here before," the whole thing.
Right.
And I was very moved by the experience. But later in life, I realized that there was this connection to my family that I didn't know. I learned about very intimate details about my family that my grandmother wrote to my cousin that nobody in our family would have ever learned. Um, but more than that, Tony, I kind of learned about myself. I had this journey and I traveled and I learned on my own. And I was kind of at that age where you're kind of forming your opinions and your life experiences. And I think to myself, if I didn't have that experience where I made all these family connections that I'm still in touch with, how would life be different? Like what would I have? That ability to kind of find a touch point and create an ancestral journey for me was a pretty important experience. And I related that to my children and my mom. And I thought to myself, what if my great-great-grandchild doesn't even know my mom existed? Doesn't even get to have the opportunity of embarking on a journey where that child learns about themselves and about their family. Like what could that mean? And that became a big part of why I felt it was so very important to be have my mother be buried in a legally recognized cemetery where burial records are not only kept through the cemetery and the municipality, but the vital statistic recording within the state.
And something that's, I think, maybe lost in that. So I guess it's not a shock, but I'm an avid journaler, right? I have books and books and books of everything that's ever happened to me. I ate 3 apples today, right? But my house could burn down. And having a memorial that someone else is perpetually in charge of, I don't know if there's a better way to kind of establish that. There's nothing that you could leave to your children that you could be sure for a fact that your great-great-great-grandchildren will get, except the footprint of where you were in the public record. And that is something, that's a connection that I never made until you just said it, but it's a huge and important one, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, technology changes. I think at the time, early 1900s, I don't think that they envisioned kind of this digital world.
Mm.
And, what made it past that page to paper, pencil to paper record to the digital records? Maybe some, but not all. However, if it's within a vital statistic recording that is public record, that all becomes imported into our
Whatever
kind
the
of,
new technology is, absolutely.
yeah.
One of the stories we write all the time is about, these tech guys who have to go and lock themselves in these rooms and turn all of these cards into digital files. But then the cards get kept and cataloged and and stored in archives?
It's an immense responsibility that cemetery keepers have, but I think there's a bit of an antiquity around it, and not because that's what's desired. When I visit, like, I'm part of the cemetery commission in New Hampshire, and the people there and the cemetery keepers for the municipal cemeteries, they're the unsung heroes of all of this.
Yeah.
They work an incredible amount of time, hours, and play so many different roles within that setting. And I visited the Concord Cemetery, and she showed me, when somebody comes and looks for somebody, I have to go in this card file because they were buried in like 1850.
Wow.
And it's an albatross of information that they're required to keep, you know? So that is so important, that vital record statistics and in keeping within the state vital records of where somebody is buried is so important as well, to have that, other point of safekeeping. And unfortunately, with cremated remains, it's not always required that somebody be registered with vital records. But I have never met a cemetery keeper for a municipality or any state recognized cemetery that does not record cremated remains burials, even if it is not required of them.
That became the trick for you. You could have just gone to any old cemetery and that would have been fine, but you couldn't find the cemetery that your mother had kind of envisioned. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
I grew up in a industrial city named Lawrence, Massachusetts. And it was like the mid 1980s. I was a kid. And my mom was like a child of the 70s. She was just, a love child. And at the time, we had some pretty scary riots going on in the streets of Lawrence. It's pretty well documented. You can find historical information about it. But we would try to go outside and people be like throwing rocks at your Pinto. There would be like, Schlitz cans opened and shaken up as you walk past. It was scary times. And my mom would take us across the street to the rolling Catholic cemeteries so that we could play outside and be outside safely.
Wow.
And I remember as a kid, like, going out to these cemeteries in the depths of these cemeteries, following my mom because she had the French bread loaf and then in the Frisbee, and then like looking up and looking around me and being like, Ma, what are we doing here? Like, I don't want to be here. Why are we here? I don't even know if I want to enjoy the bread. And I distinctly remember her telling me, because I was so frightened of cemeteries, Mary Ellen, please don't be afraid. Death is a natural occurrence, and someday I will die and become a tree. Now, of course, it's 1980 something, and it's
Right.
euphemism for nature and life and death. Like, it was her way of saying,
It's not as grim as dust to dust.
I think it was just, don't be afraid. This is an approachable thing.
Right.
And I thought, okay, whatever. But then she had this really sad and horrible death process, and she died really young. And that's kind of where the trauma and the started for me, in order to try to memorialize her in a way in which she felt she deserved, and in a way that I felt could, it can't take away or negate her life experience and her death experience, that's for sure. But I felt like maybe it could be softer, and nothing felt good enough. She had early onset Alzheimer's at 48, was in a nursing home, passed in her early 60s after 5 years of just staring at a ceiling. And a few weeks after she passed away, I had a call from my aunt, and she said, "Oh, can you meet me in the Starbucks parking lot in Methuen?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And I really just thought we were getting a cup of coffee. But but we weren't.
That's dramatic irony.
That was not what happened. Instead, she handed me a plastic bag, and inside that plastic bag was a cardboard box. And that cardboard box said, "Half the cremated remains of Elise." And I just remember being so sad and so hurt and so angry because I thought, this is it? My beautiful mom, like, this is what she gets after staring at a ceiling for 5 years in a nursing home that smelled like pee, to be honest. Like, it was
Yeah.
just she just deserved so much better, and received that, and this feeling of such disrespect almost of the life that she lived and who she was. I just couldn't wrap my head around it, but I also I didn't know what to do. I think myself and why I relate so much to the families that we serve at Life Forest is that nothing really feels like enough for the person that you lose. Nothing.
Right.
It just and for me, I did what everybody else does, and I put her in my cabinet. And I remember every year at Thanksgiving, I would say, "Mom, I promise I'm gonna do something amazing, and it's gonna be okay. Like, you won't be lost in time. Like, we're gonna make this happen." And that's when I was online or something, and I saw an urn. I believe it was the living urn that was being sold so that you could commemorate somebody by putting ashes in the urn and planting a tree in your yard.
Right.
And, as somebody who is a caretaker, I thought to myself, this is amazing. My first reaction was, oh my goodness. My mind went back to that day in the cemetery. I'm going to be a tree.
Right.
And it was like, oh, this is what's going to happen. And then I thought, oh my goodness. Okay, number one, what if I wanna go on vacation? Like, who's gonna water her tree?
Right.
Yeah, and then I also thought, well, this isn't gonna work. Like, I'm not gonna be able to she's not gonna be in vital records if I plant her in my yard.
Right. And
And that's when I had started calling some local cemeteries, including the cemetery that we had spent time in when I was a child. And it's just not part of the design, and for understandable reasons. Now I
right.
understand it. Because trees are just not friendly to stone.
Yeah.
It's just not like the combination that really.
Right. And to lawnmowers and to all of the general upkeep to the pavement.
Yeah, I think tree roots can be very damaging to existing stones and things like that. And, now I understand why the staff was like, "Oh, apologetic, but no, I'm
Hi.
sorry.
I
You
want to
can't
take
just, like,
just a
plant that tree
second to
instead of
talk
place
to
a
you
headstone.
about
That's not."
our publications here
Yeah.
at Kates-Boylston. We have
And that's kind of
several
the
subscription
inception
offers
and the
that I
beginning
want to
of
point
what
you to.
eventually has
There
become Life
are a
Forest.
bunch of different options, and I'll have links to all of those different options in the show notes. But we have American Funeral Director, American Cemetery and Cremation, and of course, Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter. That's the one that I write, and I like to brag because it is the only weekly newsletter covering funeral service news, original reporting, not regurgitated press releases, and not just opinion, although I do throw some opinions in there when the opportunity presents itself. Anyway, there are packages of all sorts for new subscribers to any or all of our publications, digital or in print, and you can find them at Kates-Boylston.com. But if you go to the show notes, there will be a link to the subscription page where you can check out our whole range of potential subscriptions. All right, well, let's get back into it with Mel. Now, how did you come across even the notion of a conservation cemetery?
Oh, by accident, Tony. It's like a journey of Narnia or something. I started by thinking to myself, well, maybe this could happen, right? Like I'm kind of a dreamer. I have this notion that, like, if I put my mind to it,
Right.
anything could happen. And I know that my mother planted that in me, no pun intended. But I thought to myself, well, I know that there are certain pieces of land that are not able to be built upon, and they are a little more cost accessible. So maybe I could find one of those little pieces of land and I could put that land into conservation to protect that land, plant my mother's tree and then add her name to the deed that she's there, right? Like it's a
Right. Close
step.
enough.
Yeah, it's close. It doesn't involve vital records, but at least it involves public record.
Right.
And that's kind of how it started. I started looking for land. And I was at one of my daughter's adoption reunions. Every year, the kids would get together and see all the other kids from their orphanage. You know, the parents would just awkwardly sit there, have a small conversation, catch up from last year kind of thing. And I was speaking to my friend John, who is a fellow adoptive parent. And he says, "So, what have you been up to? You know, what's going on?" And that's when I shared with him, I've been looking for this piece of land. I want to do this thing. I think it's really cool and a great way I could commemorate my mom. And I went through the whole thing. Then I'm going to hire a landscaper. We're going to, and he looked at me. He's like, I'm going to tell you something right now. You sound a little nuts. However, I also think it's actually a really lovely thought and idea. And maybe this could become more accessible for you to accomplish if you opened it up to other people. And at that moment, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. Like, you know, you just like the adoption community, you share resources, you share expenses, you share.
Right.
And that's kind of how the initial conversations happened around the formation. And, you know, I followed up with him. He followed up with me. Conversation started. We met at a coffee shop one day, and then all of a sudden it was happening. And I think both John and I we're just, well, let's do this thing. We can do this. We can get it done. We'll figure it out.
Mm.
And, you know, then we started looking for land and meeting with conservation groups and asking for permission. So our initial approach was to find land that was kind of central in my state, but then also already had existing conservation in order to kind of ease the process of like finding that protection. Right. And then asking for permission to do what we wanted to do.
And that process, I have a friend who started her own publishing house. And it was the reason she started her own publishing house is when she published her book, she saw how murky it was and how it was like nearly impossible to get done if you didn't know what you were doing. And so now her business also became helping people do that, right? Learn the ropes. Yep. And I feel like you have something in common with her because that's what ended up happening with your process, right?
Yeah. I think what happened after all was said and done, we're a couple years in, we have, Tony, it's a ridiculous amount of mapping cost, legal expense, and trying to answer all the questions that come up and answer them in a way that's legitimate. And
Right.
you don't necessarily, you're not handed those answers. Like you have to sit there and figure it out.
Mm.
And I think what I realized was that it was, in the long and short of it, not inexpensive to develop a cemetery. Like it's just not.
And that's it. You're talking about not even buying the land, just the legwork aside of the land.
I mean, the mapping, I can tell you that the development of Life Forest and our approach was somebody has a question for me that's a really good question and I don't have an answer. And I have to figure that out. And so one of our first questions, we were at a funeral directors conference. And this gentleman came up to me and he's like, "Oh, you're one of those fandangled new green cemetery things." You know, like this is like 2019 or something. Mm. And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I just remember what a joke that was for us because they would bury people and then they could never find them again." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean they can't find them?" He's like, "Well, you know, you don't have a map. Like there's no rows and numbers because that's how cemetery design was laid out. You know, it was like row 7. And I thought to myself, oh, well, that's like, you know, of course you could find them. But then I thought, you know what, that's a legitimate question that like, how are we going to do this in a way that,
again, the long term,
yeah,
3
long
generations,
term
4
and
generations.
people and so I think the very first huge expense and kind of hurdle was to figure out how do you even do this? How do you map it? Because it's not traditional. It's not plug and play. And I was speaking to a friend of mine named Dr. Colton Sawyer, who is, well, I'm just going to say it, a lot smarter than I am.
Right.
He's a mathematician, he's a PhD, and he works doing things within the mapping and calculation community that I am not capable of. I said to him, how come if I want to get an ice cream cone, I can type in Friendlies and then I can order my ice cream cone. And then when I order it, I can pay for it. I can get driving directions to Friendlies. It's already paid for. I can see company dynamics. I get all this information just by typing this name, but I can't type in my mother's name and see where she's buried.
Right.
And he said, well, it's the way in which, first of all, that cemeteries utilize maps. And so what he created for Life Forest, and it's a first of its kind, and we're very, very proud of it. We actually spoke, I think it was 2020, at the Green Burial Conference to teach about GIS mapping and how we created it. He said, everything has a point in space. It has a coordinate. So what we can do is we can take that coordinate and I can create shape files. I can download publicly accessible shape files, or I can work with the government, the local municipality, to get permissions to get access GIS shape files that have overlays of the topography. So you get the soil types, you get, is there ledge in that spot? You will understand how far are you from water? Where is your highest point of water table? The amount of information that's available through USGS record is pretty profound when it comes to the land. So he said we can start with that, and then we can create our own software that layers together the legacy of the person. So what is this person's name? Their vital statistics. What state are they recorded in for their vital statistics? Who was their funeral home? What's their cremation number?
Right.
Who's their next of kin? Who has beneficiary rights? And all of those shape files, he created a software program that merges that information and then gets reshared to public informational maps. So he basically works with the government files in order to have our records be able to be publicly recorded within GIS mapping records.
Do you have to work through the cemetery boards, your local cemetery boards as well, or is that sufficient?
Well, I mean, we are a member of the cemetery board, but that mapping is just so very different from what anybody else does that we created our own internal software. And we go out and we're able to map the land. Like I can go out now, he has an app that I download, and I can stand on a piece of land. He's in Colorado, I'm in New Hampshire, and I can mark the point in space. And he has to do some sort of like triangular calculation because satellite has an offset of something I don't understand, Tony. But, I have to get 3 different points in the same spot so that he can get a most accurate within a foot or 2 direct coordinate for that space. And then he can import that coordinate into our mapping design in order to know exactly where it is on the property and whether or not, how close are we to water? Are we able to legally bury in this spot? Am I going to put my shovel in the ground and hit ledge? Does it even make sense for me to put a plot here? Like, don't waste your energy because you're going to hit a rock in 2 feet. That technology, that was a difficult one. I mean, that was tricky, and we're very fortunate to have had this extremely intelligent person be on our team and work with me to create like the vision because, I can dream it, but putting it into action is a much more complicated process. And so Dr. Sawyer's mapping system is part of our kind of intellectual property package. And then we also have obviously our own types of CRM, and we also have all of our legal documents. That was approved through our land lawyers. We worked with local cemetery experts in order to make sure that we were doing things correctly. Unfortunately, Tony, every state is different, right? It's not
I know.
But there's a vein of like, okay, you're trying to present something that's like in a forest setting or in a natural setting. You have to answer questions like, how do you make this ADA compatible? Like, how are you going to ensure that somebody who is reliant on a real wheelchair can access the different areas of the forest? so part of that design when you set up a cemetery is how are we working to make this ADA accessible? And so what we did is we worked with the National Forest. We learned about how do they make this ADA accessible? What are the rule sets that they follow? And we created and based that rules because there's not like,
Right.
forest cemetery ADA rule sets out there. So we used them as a guide. We spoke to them. We made sure that we understood, okay, what kind of hard pack, what kind of gravel are you going to need? What grade do you need to have? All of those things, like how far apart do you need to have places or benches set in order for a person who needs to sit down for a second?
Mm.
What is that? What is the requirement for that? And how do you build that into your cemetery design? So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. How the closest road, what is the speed limit of the closest road? How far back do you need to have your parking in order to pull out appropriately and not get hit by a car? So all of those things became beyond just like, oh, you want to be a cemetery. There's so many just zoning regulations, what kind of things need special permitting, what has to go to public hearing, what doesn't have to go to public hearing, what aspect of local government is giving you your approvals. It's the real estate government. Some areas it's like Maine was the CDC. I mean, there's
Right.
just in New Hampshire, we use the Attorney General's office. Like, you have to do that homework and it's time consuming. But at this point, I mean, I have it down. So I thought to myself, what if I was in a position where I had a piece of land or I really had this passion to do this, but I didn't have, $300,000 to $500,000 to pay for mapping, to pay for legal, to pay
Right.
for design, to pay for all of the things that are required to not only start up the cemetery, but to operate the cemetery. And that's where we kind of came up with this approach to make it more accessible to people.
It was so exciting to me when I thought you were doing it a different way. I had described it as like that you were personally going from state to state and opening all of these cemeteries. But you told me it's so much more interesting than that. So you kind of provide the template for people who want to do that, and I just think that's fantastic. So can you talk a little bit about the first time someone approached you? Is that how did it work out
Yeah.
that you ended up expanding?
Ironically, I just met with a couple who flew out to New Hampshire, and just yesterday, I walked the land with a couple from Kansas who wants to open a life forest in Kansas. Basically, the first time it happened was organic, mostly in line with how all of the things life forest happened. We were working with a large animal body composting facility in Maine. They are one of the first body composting facilities for large animals. I mean, honestly, they may be the first in the country. She's been in operation for quite some time. And I found her, she had interviews on all these fancy places. And I thought, ooh, I need to educate myself more on this composting of bodies. It's kind of coming into play. Now, this is really early on.
Right.
And also, it may not be kind of something that we're doing human composting in my state, but I do bury a lot of pets. Like maybe this is something that somebody would want to compost their pet and we could have a burial. So I approached this woman who was owning and operating and still does Compassionate Composting, Michelle. I called her and she was gracious enough to invite me to view it and to meet her. And I realized in that moment how much I learned from her in such a short amount of time, as well as her reverence for the land around her, as well as the animal that she's serving. The amount of love and compassion that she showed to those animals, I was like, these are my people. Like,
Right.
I
Yeah.
like this person. And so we had just kind of established a professional working relationship to service the composting of pets. And it came to be that some zoning issues changed in her state. And there was a large parcel of land across from her current farm that had been open to being rezoned to become a housing community. Now, this is somebody who spent the last 20 years walking that land, protecting that land for the owner who lived out of state. And she was, beside herself. She's like, market is high. What's going to happen? It's 40 acres. It's beautiful. It's in a very desirable spot in Maine. I'm going to be looking at McMansions in
Right.
2 years. Like, she advocated and advocated to have this rule not pass. And when it became evident that it was going to pass, she approached me and said, I need help. I am going to buy this land. I'm going to figure out how to get this land, but I need to protect it. And I need to do it in a way that is irreversible. And I need to do it in a way that has some sort of income because, she's not
Expensive.
Yeah, it is. Buying land is not cheap. So she did it. She she rubbed those pennies together and she bought that land with passion. And I met that passion and worked with her and the state of Maine to be able to open a life forest location. We gave her all of our intellectual property rights, the branding. We worked with her to both self-brand her own part, the Whistle Ridge. She has autonomy. She is her own cemetery. She has a very different goal and approach than the Life Forest in Hillsborough. We are very focused on making it approachable for kids and not scary for children. We really are working towards, stigma-related deaths. But her passion is wildlife protection. So her site has a lot of similar approaches when you look at it in a larger picture, but her ethos is slightly different. She just had an incredible vernal pool event. She had one of the top, if not in the country, in the world, reptile experts come and speak on her land. A lot of participants showed up for it. Her goal is to protect the wildlife. She is not interested in tree planting. She is interested in, I just want to let people have a beautiful walk through the woods and choose different areas. She labels the areas for the local, like, what's growing here? Is it birch trees? This is a birch tree area. She doesn't disrupt it. She just finds viable plots within it, and that's it. And so while we kind of work under the Life Forest umbrella, we answer the phone for her. We send out all of her legal documents. We help her with social media. We do all the social media. I'm sure you understand, like,
Right.
Google ads, all of that stuff. And then also, because it is required also in Maine to have a nonprofit, the Life Force nonprofit is also serving as her advisory board. And everything that we do kind of works through that central nonprofit.
I was absolutely blown away. I thought that was a stroke of genius, and I'm so excited for you, and I'm excited for you going forward. We are running up against it a little bit, so I do want to ask you if there's any final thoughts that I didn't give you a chance to say. Now's your time to say them.
No pressure, Tony.
No pressure at all.
So I was very honored to be asked to speak about our guardianship program. What we're speaking about is allowing for people who pass in the care of a public guardian and providing legal cemetery burials at no cost or a sliding fee scale in order for these human beings who are left unclaimed to be able to have a single respected burial that is recorded with vital statistics. And our funeral director, that is a big part of our team, she came up with this idea. She said, I have so many people. Yeah. And the biggest part of it is that people don't always know that their loved one died within the care of a public guardian. That public guardian has one contact. If that contact doesn't answer the phone or just isn't a close dynamic or relative, or maybe they don't, have a good relationship with the person that passed away, that doesn't mean that there's not other people who love that person, and they will look for them. And we have had so many people, they basically type in the name of their loved one because they can't find them. And then they come up with Life Forest and like, what is this? And they call us and we're the ones that tell them, this is a cemetery and your person has passed away.
Wow.
There's always a little bit of shock at first and like, where are you? What is this? And then there's a lot of people who are so extremely grateful that their person wasn't scattered somewhere that they'll never find or, disposed of in other ways. And then, many of them purchase a plot right next to them.
I just loved that story when you told it to me because that's like an unintended consequence of the very thing that got you started on this road, which just ties the story up so beautifully.
Yeah, I think if you look at death care and death in general, it's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around, because just being a person that, I want to make this available to people. I am not, I don't know, I'm not from sales. I don't know how it all works.
Right.
But there's an article by Robin Val Kilmer, and it's all about gift economy and kind of growing your passions through giving. And I thought to myself, well, that's a way to go. I can just give as much as I can give, and then you kind of generate abundance. It's been very successful for Life for us to do it in that way. And we are appreciative of all of the growth that we have. Sometimes I walk around, like I was at the land yesterday, and we had quite a few team members there. We had volunteers on site. I had this couple fly in from Kansas. There was a lot just kind of happening, people were walking the land with their dogs.
Yeah.
And, you look around, you're like, whoa. There was a time when I honestly thought I'd buried my mother alone in the woods.
Right.
What have I done? But it's really fantastic when you look around and you see, well, it's working. People love it. People are finding peace here. It's all okay. We're all in this together. I'm not alone in the woods. My mom's not alone in the woods. We're in this. We're a community and a family, and everybody knows each other. And that's the feel good part of an industry that it doesn't always feel so good. It can be really, really emotionally difficult. So, I hang on to that. I like it a lot.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. It was an absolute pleasure. I will have you on again soon, and we will talk more about unclaimed remains. We should have left the unclaimed for an entire other show, but I wanted to at least hit on it so that people knew it was part of what you were doing. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tony. You have a good day.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in
for a couple more minutes after the official interview ended, because I was also going to and have turned it into a story for American Cemetery and Cremation. That'll be out in August for subscribers, and I don't know if you heard the commercial, but we are running new specials for new subscribers. If you'd like to get any or all of our publications, you can do so at a special rate. Link in the show notes. Mel also was kind enough to send along a care package that included some of the chocolate bars that they sell to support their indigent program. I'm going to do an unboxing, and once that is done, I will attach it to the story that comes out in American Cemetery on August 1st, and that will do it for this week. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. If you'd like to send feedback, we take it at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. And that will do it for this time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.